So when it comes to emotion regulation, um, that is that attempt to try to regulate your own emotions. And so some people are good at it, some people are not so great at it. Um, and some jobs require more emotional regulation that there's versus others. And so what's interesting is that if they have a difficult time trying to regulate their emotions at work, there's been some research that says typically some people end up going to the bar and trying to increase alcohol consumption associated with some of this. Um, and they try to regulate their own emotions. And so some people do that in a positive way. There's some people do that in a negative way. And so what by regulating, you're like, all right, fine, I'll have some high level of deep surface acting, but then I'm going to go to the bar and drink it away. Like that's not a healthy sort of situation for that. So regulating your emotions is part of that deep and surface acting. That how difficult it is talking about that labor associated with it. And then there are people we've done some research on emotional intelligence. It's it's kind of controversial because it's not really intelligence, sort of, but it's basically your ability to recognize and control emotions, recognize other people's emotions, and control your own emotions. And you need to probably pause this and think about the two people in your life that are really really good at managing their emotions, and then the one person that's really really bad at managing their emotions. Now you have a better understanding about what emotional intelligence really means. Um, you can understand how that person that you thought of that can't handle their emotions, put them in a highly emotional job and see how well they do. And you would say, oh, that's not going to work. You know, I'm talking about like if we're talking about if you're an airline pilot or you're a wartime pilot and you're under stress and you have to make decisions and that kind of stuff. If you can't control your emotions, you're not going to do so hot in that situation. And we see that people tend to vary on their ability to not only control their and regulate their own emotions, but also to recognize the emotions in others. And so that's also kind of another sort of tangential skill that's kind of helpful in the workplace, that if you can understand other people's emotions, then you could probably, minimize any negative emotions spiraling out of control, or to recognize that whatever you're doing is working if you're actually getting better emotions out of your workforce, and that kind of stuff. So we've seen that's another concept that we do research on. And this other idea is emotional contagion, which speaks to this idea of when we're talking about all these psychological constructs and concepts on a affective level, and even a little bit on a behavioral level, but this is talking about emotional contagion, which we're talking about emotions. Typically, the context in which you're in can have an effect on your emotions, and so we've seen research before where um, people within a group tend to emotionally sort of synchronize. And so what that means is that if you've got, some negative people in a situation, it's not uncommon that the rest of the people who might not have started negative might feel a little bit more negative because the emotions tend to synchronize within that group. It could be conscious or it could be unconscious, that you're aware of it versus not. If you're aware of it, you still can't do anything about it because you got somebody that's either super positive or super negative. Um, but we do research on this. Why? Because we should find out how detrimental a negative person could be within a group. You know what I'm saying? So like you might have a group of five people and you hired five people and you thought you hired five, I guess, relatively happy people and that kind of stuff, but you ended up hiring somebody that's not that emotionally happy all the time and is going to bring down the other four people. If that's the case, it's, it'll appear like you hired five not so happy people, which which is incorrect because in reality you hired four out of five happy people, but since they have that contagion, that might justify and have a large effect on the overall group. So that's why we want to do that kind of research. And there has been research that demonstrates that yes, emotional contagion, conscious and or unconscious, is there, and we need to be concerned about it. So you can probably if you haven't watched this, I would suggest you watching it because the first time I found it. I mean, I don't know how many times I've watched this because it's hilarious. Um, but pause this, look this up, watch it, and that kind of stuff. It's sort of a example of emotional contagion when um, the concept is that one person starts to laugh and being a comic on a skit show, when you're not supposed to laugh because the audience is supposed to laugh, but you're not supposed to laugh. But then one starts laughing, then the other can't stop, and that's kind of idea that an emotional contagion can happen. So you can see it in real time, how that actually works. But I want you to use that as an example, is that can work on a general level, in the workplace as well. All right, so let's talk about the broaden and build theory of positive emotions. And so, when I started learning psychology, they were just on the cusp of positive psychology. And you're like, what's positive psychology? Because I don't even think I hear positive psychology anymore. It's basically sort of a reaction to, a lot of things in psychology were sort of focused on the negative. So we were always worried about damage, um, instead of worrying about things that improved. So it would seem like it was a little easier to see things that were making, something bad happen, as opposed to looking for something that led to good outcomes. And so positive psychology tried to get at that. And so you can see that reflected in some of the ideas that IO psychology is looking at more. And so one of these is the broaden and build positive, or theory of positive emotions. And this idea that, and let's start at the very bottom here, this positive emotion kind of thing. So if you experience positive emotions, happiness, satiation, whatever, that will tend to broaden your thinking and broaden your openness, to novel thoughts, to new activities, to new relationships, to current relationships, deepen relationships, and that kind of stuff. So there's been research that the more positive emotions you experience, the more likely you are to open up your idea, your cognitions broaden, your neurons widen. You start thinking about bigger things, and you don't narrow focus. Whereas, research has demonstrated if you're in a negative emotional state, it's almost like your body turns into a fight or flight kind of situation where, your thinking becomes very narrowed, and it comes to, more fight or flight. Like it gets you prepared to fight something, and so it'll increase your heart rate and your hormones and that kind of stuff, and it'll get you to the run or fight. Typically, you're not doing, rocket science at that point because you're not focused on that. You're worried about fighting something. So if you're more positive, you don't have to worry about those kind of things. You're in more control. And if you're in more control, you open up things. And when you open up those things to new ideas, new thoughts, new activities, new relationships, deeper relationships, that kind of stuff, then that will tend to translate into building more personal resources. And so now you're going to have more social support. You're going to have more, greater resilience towards stress. You're going to have, easier skill development. You're going to probably learn more things and retain things to a higher extent, and that kind of stuff. And so it's just all these really good things that can happen, if you open up your ideas and your minds a little bit more. And so then if you have higher resources or resilience and skills and knowledge, and you can even have better physical outcomes because, under high levels of stress, your body deteriorates. So you have less stress, so therefore you have better physical outcomes, that kind of stuff. So then that leads to enhanced health, survival, fulfillment, that kind of stuff. And then it just, once you're in that state of enhanced health, survival, fulfillment, it's a lot easier to stay positive and view positive and find positive and that kind of stuff. So it's this idea that things cycle through. So the trick here is that, yeah, we found a whole bunch of support that this works. It's just trying to figure out how to get this at work, when people might not want to be there doing that kind of work, or everyone has a part of their job that they don't like. So how do you maintain that level of, positive emotions during that kind of time? And so that's sort of our job, is to try to figure out how to maximize this experience at work. All right, let's start talking about some of the job attitudes, that are out there. So we'll talk about each of these four in subsequent, PowerPoints here, but these are the big four that you could probably start with when it comes to IO psychology, but there's a whole bunch of other ones. But let's talk about job satisfaction first. So what do we got going on here? So, I, unfortunately, I taught, a measures course. I teach, methodological courses. I teach statistics courses. So I get a little too, specific when we start talking about things, but I kind of want you just to understand, how do we actually measure somebody's job satisfaction? I mean, sample measures. We got the job descriptive index in the bottom here, the Minnesota satisfaction questionnaire, and that kind of stuff. But I want you to actually think about like what are the questions that we would ask, and the questions we would end up asking is basically do do you like your job? The end. Are you satisfied with your job? Do you hate your job? That kind of stuff. So it's very straightforward and that kind of stuff. So they could be broad global measures of job satisfaction. So if I ask you right now about a job that you've had before, you currently have and that kind of stuff, are you satisfied with your job? 1 to 10, 1 to 7, 1 to 5, whatever. I can ask you that, and then that's a global measure. That's what we consider a global measure of job satisfaction. Or I can ask you, are you satisfied with your supervisor? Are you satisfied with your pay? Are you satisfied with your promotional opportunities? Are you satisfied with your coworkers? Are you satisfied with your parking, your job commute? This would be facet satisfaction. So we can go into parts, facets, separate parts of your job to see how satisfied you are with there. And so you can see like why would we want to ever do this? Global job satisfaction, if you're thinking about global kind of things, like if you're looking at your whole organization, like what's the average job satisfaction of all employees and that kind of stuff. But if you actually didn't like that measure, like if you're like, ooh, we've got job satisfaction problems, something's not going right, you probably want to measure the job facet satisfaction and find out where they're specifically low and then maybe do some changes there. Try to find out where somebody has the lowest amount of job satisfaction. Is it pay? Is it your management? Is it your commute? Is it your workload? Any of that kind of stuff. And then you might be able to tackle specific levels of job satisfaction, that kind of stuff. So that's and why let's go to the next slide. So why do we want to do this? Like why do we care? So well, before we even get there, you see job satisfaction is on the far right here. So job satisfaction is the outcome, the final thing here. How do we get to impact somebody's job satisfaction? So we got positive affectivity on the far left here, and we got objective job circumstances over here. So positive affectivity is this sort of innate part of every human that is, are you more or less positive? We know, again, we know these people. You can just see somebody's more positive or more negative in life. So that's not necessarily up to the business and the organization to try to manipulate because you can't. This is a little bit more the genetic component that we talked about earlier. Objective job circumstances are more that's talking about like what does the job entail? Under what circumstances is it? What kind of management you have? What kind of pay structure do you have? What kind of hours do you have? What the job actually is. Those are actual things of the job that could have an impact on somebody's job satisfaction. So both of those are at play. They both lead into the interpretation of the job circumstances. So whatever the job is, the reason why we have this interpretation of job circumstances is because somebody might have the same level of positive affectivity. It's the exact same job. We have the same job circumstances, but two different people see it very differently. Somebody was just like, I never had a job in my life. I love this job. I love having a job. Somebody is just like, I had the best job ever. It paid me 500 times more than I'm getting paid right now. And they're not satisfied with the job, but it's the exact same job. So that's the interpretation of what's going on there. So you might be able to help individuals with that interpretation of job circumstances, but sometimes you might not be able to do that either. Because again, you're in like a really bad economy, somebody might just be happy to have that job and they're satisfied with their job. But if they've got, really good economy, they're like, I want to go find another job that's better. Um, so that's this psychological sort of understanding about what's going on with job satisfaction there. It's not what I wanted to do. Or am I still? Nope. Oh, maybe I'm. Damn it.